So within our quadratics, I am eventually going to end up teaching you 3 different ways in order to solve quadratics. I've taught you one way so far, and that was by factoring. We did that back before our February break, so we're still going to have to practice it a little bit. Another way of being able to solve your quadratics is by using the quadratic formula. So our quadratic formula would be, starts with x equals, because that's what we're solving for. We're solving for the letter x. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It does look like a lot, especially the first time you see it, but just think of it this way. All you have to be able to do is use the formula. Somebody else already came up with it. So somebody did all of the work to come up with this formula that works for you. The cool thing about the quadratic formula is this works on every quadratic. With factoring, however, that doesn't work on every quadratic because not every quadratic can be factored. So yeah, factoring sometimes can be faster, but we know the quadratic formula is always going to work on every single quadratic that we were possibly given. So to help us remember that formula, there is a little song that goes along with it to help you remember.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. I didn't understand a word.
We'll go through it again. All right, so when we are using the quadratic formula, much like when we are factoring, first thing we need to do is make sure we are in standard form, which means we're in ax squared plus bx plus c equals a 0. Since we're solving algebraically, we want it to be equal to a 0. But the main thing is your x squared term has to be first, and then your x, and then your c, which we call our constant. That's just your number. So when we are doing this, you got to first identify what actually are your a, b, and c values. Make yourself a little list, which we will do. You then substitute your values into the quadratic formula that we are given up above. Perform the given operations that you can. And then the answer should be in simplest radical form or as a decimal as required. They generally tell you to either round your answer to the nearest tenth or to write your answer in simplest radical form so you know which one you're doing. So let's take a look at our first example here. We have given g of x equals this. Solve for x when g of x equals 0 by using the quadratic formula. Now this notation right here, this is the kind of notation you're going to see on the Regents exam. What they're telling you to do is they're telling you to take g of x over here and replace that with a 0, not to plug a 0 in for x. If they wanted us to plug a 0 in for x, where would the 0 have been? In the parentheses. They would have written it as g of 0, but that's not what they wrote here. So they wanted us to set it equal to 0. That's their way of saying set it equal to 0. So let's make sure, are we in standard form? Yeah, we got our x squared, we got our x, and then we got our constant. So let's go ahead and identify our a, b, and c. So our a value is in front of our x squared term, so our a is a 3. B is in front of your x, so that's a negative 5. And then your c is a 2. So then what you should do is we're going to write down our quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Oh my god, I didn't repeat. So cute. I just think about that little soup. I'm going to use my nephew. I'm going to take her home.
Well, she's not 3 anymore.
How How old do you think she is?
That video, I think, was from like 2011. So she's like 9 now.
Oh. She can say who knows if she still remembers it. Kids do not suck.
Alright, so now that we have our quadratic formula down, when you go to substitute your values in, always put the parentheses around them, otherwise you're going to make mistakes. So we've got the negative sign from the negative b, and then I'm plugging in a negative 5 for my b value.
Why is there a parenthesis?
Because when you're plugging in a value, because that's from my formula, my b value, if you look at our list over here, was a negative 5. So then I'm going to have in parentheses negative 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2, both in parentheses, all over 2 times 3. Okay, so let's clean some stuff up a little bit. I've got this minus and negative, which means it's what? So I have positive 5 plus or minus. Let's figure out the stuff underneath the radical sign. What is negative 5 squared? Nope, positive 25. And then 4 times 3 times 2. 4 times 3 times 2, 24. All over 2 times 3 gives us 6. So now, what is 25 minus 24? 1. What is the square root of 1? 1. So this becomes 5 plus or minus 1 all over 6. So we got to actually continue this out and find the answers. So that means we're going to have 5 plus 1 divided by 6.
Do we really have to do like all these steps?
Mm-hmm. So what is 5 plus 1?
6.
Divided by 6 gives us... So there's one of our answers, x equals 1. Mm-hmm. Where the other one is going to be 5 minus 1 over 6. 4 over 6, which reduces to 2/3. So that would be our other answer. So x equals 1 and x equals 2/3 are our two answers for that one. Okay, let's take a look at our examples on the back. So we have solved the equation x squared plus x minus 2 equals 5x plus 1 for values of x expressed in simplest radical form. That's a key thing right there, simplest radical form.
Did we not do that before?
Our last answer was not simplest radical form because we didn't have a radical. Radical is what we were talking about last time. So first thing we have to do is get this into standard form. So I'm going to subtract my 5x from both sides and subtract my 1. So that gives us x squared minus 4x minus 3 equals 0.
We always put it to 0.
Always set it equal to 0, yes. So what is our a value? A is a 1, b is a negative 4, and c is negative 3. So let's write out our quadratic formula. go ahead, plug our values in. So we're going to have, again, negative 4 plus or minus negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3 all over 2 times 1. So let's clean this up a little bit. The negative 4 turns to what? Positive 4. This time, in your calculator, let's just do this as one step. Without the radical sign, what is negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3? Without the radical sign, type in your calculator, parentheses, the negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3. That should be a negative 3.
Stop.
Negative 4.
Times 328. Did I get 192?
Should be 28.
What?
All right, let me pull up my calculator.
I
got
I
28.
got 192. Okay, Caitlin, we're just gonna acknowledge that.
I got negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3.
All right, so you should have parentheses negative 4 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses negative 3. Yep, you should get 28. If we wrote it in parentheses on the paper, you should put the parentheses in the calculator. That's why they're there. So then it's all over 2. So we got 4 plus or minus square root of 28 all over 2. Now again, our directions said simplest radical form. So I'm going to step out of the problem for a second and look at just my radical 28. What's our perfect square that goes into 28? Four times what?
7.
So 4 goes first because that's the perfect square. 7 goes in the second radical. So what is the square root of 4? 2. So we get 2 radical 7. So now I'm going to go back here and plug that in. So I have 4 plus or minus 2 radical 7 all over 2. Which we did do that last class. That's why I had you do ones like these. So now you want to look at all the numbers outside of the radical. Can I reduce all those?
Yes.
By what? 2. 4 divided by 2 is? 2 divided by 2 is? And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So we get x equals 2 plus or minus 1 radical 7. So remember, we still have our 2 answers. We have 2 plus the radical 7 and then 2 minus the 1 radical 7.
We write those out.
Nope, you can leave it just like that.
And now we do that one that says simplest radical form.
And yep, that's our simplest radical form.
Which only cross that.
So number 3, we're solving the equation for values of x to the nearest tenth. So this time they're telling us we're going to round. We're going to have decimal answers here. So first thing we need to do is cross multiply.
X squared
X plus 1 times x minus 2 is going to equal 3 times 1, which is just a 3. So now we need to distribute. X times x is
x squared
x times negative 2, negative 2x. 1 times x, 1 times negative 2, and then it still equals our 3.
Then we have to
Alright.
So combine our like terms here. So that gives me x squared minus x minus 2 equals a 3. Subtract the 3 over now so that we are in standard form. So now we can do our quadratic formula because now we are in standard form. What's our A? B, -1, and C, -5. Our A is 1, B is -1, C is -5. Bless you. So let's write our quadratic formula, -b plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. So let's start plugging in. So we're going to plug in our -1 for our b. -1 squared minus 4 times 1 times -5. So what happens to our 1 out in front? Because it's negative, negative. So we get +1 plus or minus. What would be our number under the radical? So do your -1 squared minus 4 times 1 times -5. Mm-hmm. Not quite. So yeah, you should get a 21. And then it's all over 2. Now this time, though, it said to the nearest tenth, so we don't have to try to simplify a radical, which in fact you can't simplify this radical. So what we would do is we have to separate it into 1 plus the square root of 21 all over 2 and 1 minus the square root of 21 all over 2. So we're going to use the calculator. And I've been telling you guys all year long, whenever you're doing fractions, use your alpha y equals, because when we get to something later on in the year, alpha y equals is going to save your life. This is the time when we want to use our alpha y equals. So alpha y equals, and then the first choice to give us our fraction. So then 1 plus the square root of 21. And then you go down to put in your 2. Second x squared gives you your square root sign. So to the nearest tenth, what would we have?
0.8.
2.8. No, it doesn't always work out that way. You still have to do the other one in the calculator. So again, alpha y equals, so 1 minus the square root of 21 over 2. Go ahead, type it in. Practice typing it in. Yep, -1.8. Here's our other answer. So I think when they ask for the nearest tenth, it actually is a little easier when you're using your quadratic formula.